The morning fog clung to the testing grounds at Kummersdorf, 30 kilometers south of Berlin, as Hauptmann Werner Müller approached the wooden table where 3 captured American rifles lay waiting. It was September 14th, 1943, and these M1 Garand rifles represented something the Wehrmacht had not anticipated when they invaded Poland 4 years earlier. Something that would fundamentally challenge every assumption German infantry doctrine was built upon. Müller had commanded an infantry company in France in 1940, fought in the opening months of Operation Barbarossa, survived 2 Russian winters. He knew rifles. The Karabiner 98 Kurs, the Kar 98K, had been the standard German infantry weapon since 1935. Bolt action, 5-round internal magazine, proven design dating back to 1898. Reliable, accurate, adequate for the kind of warfare Germany had been fighting. But these American rifles were different. Semi-automatic, 8-round en-bloc clip, gas-operated, self-loading. The intelligence reports had been clear about the specifications, but specifications on paper meant nothing compared to understanding what a weapon actually did in combat. That understanding would come today, and it would shatter the confidence that had carried German infantry across Europe. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Oberst Friedrich Paulus stood beside the testing table, watching as Müller examined the first M1. Paulus commanded the weapons testing division at Kummersdorf. He had evaluated captured French, British, Polish, Belgian, and Soviet weapons since 1940. His reports were detailed, technical, brutally honest about both strengths and weaknesses of enemy equipment. Today's evaluation would prove to be one of his most significant. The M1 Garand weighed 9.5 pounds, slightly heavier than the Kar 98K at 8.8 pounds. But that extra weight served a purpose. The gas system that enabled semi-automatic fire, the operating rod that cycled the action, the rotating bolt that locked and unlocked with each shot. Everything was designed for sustained rapid fire without manual cycling. Müller worked the action, feeling the smooth mechanical precision. American manufacturing quality was evident in every component. The machining was precise but not overly complex. The parts fit together with just enough tolerance to function reliably under field conditions. Nothing was over-engineered. Everything served a clear purpose. He loaded the en-bloc clip. 8 rounds of .30 caliber ammunition inserted from the top, pushing down against the follower until the clip locked into place with a distinctive metallic ping. The sound would become infamous among German soldiers who learned that ping meant an American rifleman nearby had just emptied his weapon and was reloading. The sound meant you had roughly 2 seconds to act before that American could fire again. Müller raised the rifle to his shoulder, aimed at the target 100 meters downrange, and squeezed the trigger. The shot surprised him. Not the recoil, which was manageable, absorbed efficiently by the gas system. The surprise was how quickly he could fire again. No bolt to work, no manual cycling, just aim and squeeze. Again. 8 rounds downrange in less than 6 seconds, every shot on target. The rifle had cycled perfectly, ejected spent casings cleanly, fed the next round without hesitation. The en-bloc clip ejected automatically after the 8th shot, leaving the action open, ready for another clip to be inserted immediately. Paulus was making notes, documenting everything. Rate of fire, accuracy, reliability, ease of operation. His expression revealed nothing, but Müller could see the calculations happening behind those cold blue eyes. German infantry tactics were built around bolt-action rifles. Trained German soldiers could fire 15 aimed shots per minute with the Kar 98K. That rate of fire had been considered adequate, even superior during the invasion of Poland and France. But this American rifle changed everything. A moderately trained soldier could fire 30 to 40 aimed shots per minute. An experienced rifleman could sustain 50. The firepower differential was not incremental, it was revolutionary. 8 rounds without reloading versus 5, semi-automatic versus bolt action. The tactical implications were staggering. The testing continued throughout the morning. Different shooters, different ranges, different conditions. Every test confirmed the same conclusion. The M1 Garand provided American infantry with a fundamental firepower advantage that German tactics had not accounted for. An advantage that was costing German lives on every battlefield where American forces were deployed. The Wehrmacht had encountered semi-automatic rifles before. The Soviet Tokarev SVT-38 and SVT-40 were semi-automatic designs that some Red Army units carried. But Soviet semi-automatics were unreliable, prone to malfunction in mud and cold, difficult to maintain in field conditions. German soldiers who captured them usually discarded them in favor of captured German weapons or their own Kar-98K. The M1 Garand was different. The reliability was undeniable. The rifle had been fired hundreds of rounds that morning without a single malfunction. Mud tests showed it continued functioning even when caked with dirt. Cold weather testing would later confirm it operated reliably down to -40 degrees. The design was robust enough to survive combat abuse while maintaining the precision necessary for accurate fire. Lieutenant Hans Dietrich, a junior officer who had fought in North Africa with the Afrika Korps, was observing the tests. He had seen American weapons at Kasserine Pass in February 1943, Germany's first major engagement with American ground forces. The Americans had performed poorly at Kasserine, inexperienced troops making tactical mistakes that German veterans exploited ruthlessly. But even in defeat, even with poor tactics and uncertain leadership, American infantry had demonstrated superior firepower. German machine gun positions that should have suppressed advancing infantry found themselves taking heavy rifle fire from ranges where bolt-action rifles were less effective. American squads laid down volumes of fire that German squads could not match. Dietrich had attributed this to American prodigality with ammunition. Americans seemed to have unlimited supplies, firing freely where German soldiers were trained to conserve every round. But watching the M1 Garand demonstration, Dietrich realized the firepower advantage was not just about ammunition supply. It was built into the weapon itself. A German infantry squad in 1943 typically consisted of 10 men, 9 with Kar-98K rifles, 1 with an MG-34 or MG-42 machine gun. Squad tactics centered on the machine gun. The machine gun provided suppressive fire while riflemen maneuvered. The riflemen were essentially support for the machine gun, the weapon system that delivered the squad's actual firepower. An American infantry squad in 1943 consisted of 12 men, 8 with M1 Garand rifles, 1 with a Browning automatic rifle, 3 with M1 carbines or submachine guns. American squad tactics distributed firepower across all riflemen. The BAR provided sustained automatic fire, but every rifleman could deliver rapid semi-automatic fire that approached machine gun rates for short periods. This meant American squads had no single critical weapon system. Suppress the BAR gunner, and the 8 Garand riflemen continued pouring fire downrange. In contrast, suppress or eliminate the German machine gunner and the squad's firepower dropped precipitously to just bolt-action rifles. Paulus completed his field testing by early afternoon. The data was comprehensive, irrefutable. He returned to his office and began drafting the report that would circulate through Wehrmacht High Command over the following weeks. His conclusions were technical, but the implications were devastating. The report noted that the M1 Garand's semi-automatic action provided American riflemen with a 3-to-1 firepower advantage over German riflemen in sustained combat. While a trained German soldier could fire 15 to 20 aimed shots per minute with the Kar-98K, an American soldier of equivalent training could fire 45 to 60 aimed shots per minute with the M1 Garand. This firepower advantage manifested at every tactical level. An American rifle platoon could deliver approximately 2,000 rounds per minute from rifles alone. A German rifle platoon could deliver roughly 700. The disparity meant American platoons could win firefights through sheer volume of accurate fire, even when outnumbered or in disadvantageous positions. Paulus included recommendations in his report. The Wehrmacht needed a semi-automatic rifle urgently. Development programs should be accelerated. Production should be prioritized even at the expense of other weapon systems. German infantry needed a weapon that could match American firepower, or losses would continue mounting at unsustainable rates. But Paulus knew his recommendations would not be implemented. Germany lacked the industrial capacity to produce semi-automatic rifles in the quantities needed. The Gewehr 43, Germany's answer to semi-automatic rifle designs, would not enter production until later in 1943, and even then only in limited numbers. Fewer than 500,000 G43s would be produced during the entire war. Meanwhile, America would produce over 4 million M1 Garands by 1945. Every American infantry division, every regiment, every company, every squad would be equipped with semi-automatic rifles. The firepower advantage would be universal, consistent, overwhelming. The economic reality underlying this disparity was simple but brutal. American factories had the capacity, the resources, the secure production environment to manufacture complex weapons in massive quantities. German factories, increasingly targeted by Allied strategic bombing, struggling with raw material shortages, forced to use slave labor, could not match that output. Back at the testing range, Müller was conducting additional evaluations. He was comparing the M1 Garand directly with the Kar-98K, firing both rifles at the same targets, measuring practical differences in combat effectiveness. The results confirmed what the morning's testing had revealed. The Kar-98K was an excellent bolt-action rifle, accurate, reliable, well suited for aimed fire at individual targets. German soldiers trained with this weapon became proficient marksmen, capable of hitting targets at ranges exceeding 500 meters. The rifle's 5-round magazine was adequate for deliberate fire where each shot was carefully aimed, but combat rarely consisted of carefully aimed shots at distant targets. Combat was chaos, confusion, targets appearing suddenly at close to medium ranges, the need to suppress enemy positions while maneuvering, the requirement to deliver overwhelming firepower in the critical seconds that determined who lived and who died. In those conditions, the M1 Garand's advantages were decisive. The semi-automatic action meant the shooter never lost his sight picture between shots. The rifle stayed on target while the action cycled, allowing rapid follow-up shots without the major movements required to work a bolt. The 8-round capacity meant fewer reloads during critical moments. Müller documented one, particularly telling comparison. He engaged a series of targets at ranges from 50 to 300 meters, measuring time required to hit all targets. With the Kar-98K, working the bolt between each shot, he needed 42 seconds to engage 8 targets. With the M1 Garand, using the semi-automatic action, he needed 18 seconds for the same target sequence. The time differential represented the margin between life and death in infantry combat. 18 seconds versus 42 seconds meant American soldiers could suppress German positions, maneuver to better positions, or eliminate threats before German soldiers could respond effectively with bolt-action rifles. Feldwebel Otto Schultz, a veteran infantry NCO with combat experience in Poland, France, and Russia, participated in the afternoon testing. Schultz commanded a rifle squad on the Eastern Front before being reassigned to training duties after suffering severe frostbite during the winter of 1941-42. He understood infantry combat at the most fundamental level. Schultz fired both rifles, compared them tactically, reached conclusions that matched Müller's, but framed them from an NCO's perspective, focused on practical battlefield realities rather than abstract firepower calculations. With the Kar-98K, Schultz explained, a soldier must think about every shot. Work the bolt, load the next round, aim, fire. It forces deliberate action. With this American rifle, the soldier just aims and pulls the trigger repeatedly. The rifle does everything else. That simplicity was not a weakness. It was a profound strength. German training emphasized marksmanship, discipline, deliberate aimed fire. Those were valuable skills, but they required time to develop. American training could focus on basic rifle skills. Knowing the weapon itself provided the mechanical advantage that made average soldiers effective. Germany was running out of time to train soldiers properly. Casualties on the Eastern Front were catastrophic. Replacement troops received abbreviated training before being sent forward. These inadequately trained soldiers struggled with the Kar-98K's manual action under stress, making errors that cost them their lives. The M1 Garand would have been more forgiving for inexperienced troops. The semi-automatic action reduced the manual operations required, making the weapon easier to use effectively under combat stress. American replacement troops received the same abbreviated training as German replacements, but their weapons compensated for inexperience in ways German weapons could not. As evening approached, the testing concluded. Paulus compiled his data, wrote his preliminary conclusions, prepared the report that would be distributed to infantry commanders throughout the Wehrmacht. The conclusions were unambiguous, professionally stated, devastating in their implications. The M1 Garand provided American infantry with a decisive, firepower advantage at the individual soldier level. This advantage scaled to squad, platoon, company, and battalion levels, creating cumulative effects that traditional German infantry tactics could not overcome through better training, superior tactics, or greater soldier motivation. German forces could still win tactical engagements through combined arms coordination, better use of terrain, superior tactical leadership, or local numerical superiority. But in infantry versus infantry firefights at similar force ratios, American units possessed a fundamental advantage that German infantry could not match with existing weapons. The report would reach senior Wehrmacht commanders within days. Most would file it away, acknowledge the problem, and continue fighting with the weapons they had because no alternatives existed. A few would recognize that this report documented a symptom of Germany's larger strategic failure. Germany had entered the war believing superior training, better tactics, and greater soldier quality would overcome any material disadvantages. That belief had proven correct in Poland, France, and the early months in Russia. But by late 1943, the material disadvantages had grown so large that training and tactics could no longer compensate. The M1 Garand was just one example. American industry produced not only more rifles, but better rifles, not only more ammunition, but better ammunition in greater quantities, not only more of everything, but better versions of everything, delivered reliably to frontline units that never experienced the supply failures that plagued German forces. That evening, Müller wrote his own observations in a personal journal he maintained. He was more frank than Paulus could be in official reports. The Americans have built a rifle that matches their approach to warfare. Müller wrote, mass production, mechanical advantage, overwhelming firepower. They do not need every soldier to be an expert marksman, because their rifle makes average soldiers effective. They have industrialized infantry combat the same way they industrialized everything else. The observation was prescient. American military doctrine in World War II emphasized firepower over maneuver, material advantage over tactical finesse, overwhelming force over elegant solutions. The M1 Garand embodied that doctrine at the most basic level, the individual infantryman's personal weapon. German doctrine had evolved differently. German military thinking emphasized the decisive battle, the breakthrough, the encirclement, maneuver warfare that destroyed enemy forces through superior movement and coordination rather than attrition. That doctrine worked when German forces possessed material parity or slight disadvantage. It failed when material disadvantage became overwhelming. By September 1943, material disadvantage was overwhelming. American production exceeded German production in every category. Soviet production exceeded German production. British Commonwealth production exceeded German production. The combined Allied industrial output was roughly 5 times German industrial output. No amount of superior tactics could overcome a 5-to-1 material disadvantage sustained over years. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The M1 Garand tests at Kummersdorf revealed this reality in microcosm. One rifle, one weapon system, demonstrating the broader pattern. American industry could produce complex, sophisticated weapons in massive quantities. German industry could not. That capability gap would determine the war's outcome more surely than any battle, any general, any tactical innovation. That night, the captured M1 Garand rifles were locked in the armory at Kummersdorf. They would be studied further, disassembled completely, analyzed for manufacturing techniques, examined for design principles that might be adapted to German weapons development. But that study would reveal only what German engineers already knew. American manufacturing capability exceeded German capability in precision, scale, and consistency. The rifles themselves were testimony to American industrial sophistication. Every component precisely machined, every part interchangeable with parts from any other M1 Garand, every rifle capable of being field-stripped and reassembled by soldiers with minimal training. This interchangeability was not accidental. It was the result of American manufacturing philosophy that emphasized standardization, mass production, and user serviceability. German manufacturing philosophy had evolved differently, emphasizing craftsmanship, precision, custom fitting of parts to individual weapons. German weapons worked beautifully when maintained properly by skilled armorers. They functioned less reliably when maintained by common soldiers under field conditions. American weapons were designed, assuming maintenance would be performed by common soldiers, and they functioned reliably under those conditions. This philosophical difference reflected deeper cultural and economic differences. Germany was a nation that valued artisan traditions, master craftsmen, products made to exacting standards by skilled workers. America was a nation that valued efficiency, standardization, products made by unskilled workers operating machines that ensured consistency. In peacetime, both approaches produced excellent results. In wartime, the American approach scaled to industrial production levels that German approaches could not match. A skilled German craftsman could produce a more finely finished rifle than an American assembly line. But the American assembly line could produce 100 rifles in the time the German craftsman produced one, and the American rifles would function just as reliably in combat. Werner Müller understood this asymmetry. His experience commanding infantry in combat had taught him that adequate weapons available in quantity mattered more than perfect weapons available in limited numbers. The M1 Garand was not a perfect rifle. It was heavy. The en-bloc clip system had disadvantages, requiring the entire clip to be expended before reloading with a fresh clip. The rifle was sensitive to ammunition quality, functioning less reliably with corroded or damaged cartridges. But these imperfections were minor compared to the rifle's decisive advantage. Semi-automatic fire at the individual soldier level transformed infantry tactics in ways that no amount of training with bolt-action rifles could replicate. American squad leaders could employ tactics that German squad leaders could not, because their riflemen could deliver sustained rapid fire that approached light machine gun rates. German infantry commanders facing American forces had adapted tactics to account for this firepower disadvantage. They emphasized use of machine guns, employment of submachine guns for close combat, coordination with artillery and armor to suppress American infantry. These adaptations worked sometimes, but they were responses to a fundamental disadvantage that tactics alone could not eliminate. Some German soldiers captured M1 Garands and used them in combat, preferring the American rifle to their issued Kar 98K. This practice was officially discouraged because ammunition supply was problematic. American .30 caliber ammunition was not compatible with standard German logistics. Soldiers using captured American weapons needed to scavenge ammunition from American sources, possible in fluid combat conditions but unreliable for sustained operations. Despite these logistics challenges, German soldiers who used captured M1 Garands reported the same experiences. The rifle was reliable, accurate, and provided firepower that changed tactical situations. German soldiers with M1 Garands could suppress American positions the way American soldiers normally suppressed German positions, reversing the usual dynamic and demonstrating that the advantage was inherent to the weapon, not to the soldiers using it. This realization was demoralizing for German infantry. They were not losing firefights because they were poorly trained or lacked courage. They were losing because their weapons were inadequate for the kind of combat American firepower forced upon them. No amount of training with bolt-action rifles would change that fundamental disparity. The reports from Kummersdorf reached Oberkommando der Wehrmacht headquarters in Berlin by late September 1943. Staff officers read Paulus's technical analysis, reviewed the firing test data, examined the tactical implications. The conclusions were filed with hundreds of other reports documenting Allied material superiority in tanks, aircraft, artillery, radios, trucks, and now individual infantry weapons. Some officers argued for accelerated development of German semi-automatic rifles. The Gewehr 41 had failed due to complexity and unreliability. The Gewehr 43 showed more promise, incorporating lessons from captured Soviet Tokarev rifles. But even if the G43 proved successful, production capacity remained the limiting factor. German industry could not manufacture semi-automatic rifles at the scale needed to re-equip the entire Wehrmacht. The arithmetic was brutally simple. Germany had approximately 3 million infantry soldiers deployed across all fronts in late 1943. Re-equipping them with semi-automatic rifles would require 3 million rifles plus spare parts, plus training, plus ammunition, logistics modifications. German industry, already struggling to produce enough Kar 98K rifles to replace combat losses, could not meet those requirements. American industry had solved this problem before the war began. The M1 Garand entered production in 1936. By 1941, Springfield Armory and Winchester, repeating arms, were producing the rifle in quantities sufficient to equip expanding American forces. By 1943, monthly production exceeded 100,000 rifles. Every American soldier deploying to combat theaters received an M1 Garand as standard issue. This industrial preparation reflected American strategic planning that German planners had dismissed as impossible. How could a nation with no recent combat experience, no large standing army, no military tradition comparable to Prussia's, prepare so effectively for industrial warfare? The answer lay in recognizing that modern warfare was industrial warfare, and America's industrial capacity exceeded that of any other nation. German strategic thinking had focused on decisive campaigns, quick victories, avoiding prolonged conflicts that would become wars of attrition. Blitzkrieg doctrine emphasized speed, surprise, concentrated force at decisive points. Approach worked brilliantly when executed with material parity or slight advantage. It failed when opponents possessed overwhelming material superiority and the strategic depth to absorb initial defeats. The Soviet Union demonstrated this in 1941 and 42. Initial German victories were spectacular, but Soviet industrial capacity, relocated beyond the Ural Mountains, continued producing tanks, aircraft, artillery, and rifles faster than German forces could destroy them. By 1943, Soviet forces were counterattacking with material superiority that German forces could not match. Now American forces were deploying to Europe and the Mediterranean with similar material advantages. The M1 Garand was just one weapon system, but it symbolized the broader pattern. American soldiers arrived at the front with better rifles, better rations, better medical care, better logistics, better everything. Not because American soldiers were superior as individuals, but because American industry supported them more effectively. Lieutenant Colonel Ernst Baum commanded an infantry regiment facing American forces in Italy during the autumn of 1943. His regiment had fought in France, Yugoslavia, and Russia before redeploying to Italy. They were experienced, disciplined, well led by junior officers who understood infantry tactics thoroughly. But they were being worn down in a grinding campaign where American firepower advantages accumulated over time. Baum wrote a letter to his wife in October 1943. He could not discuss specific tactical situations due to censorship, but he described the general character of combat against American forces. "They do not fight like the Russians," he wrote. "The Russians attack with masses of men, accepting terrible casualties to overwhelm positions. The Americans attack with masses of firepower. They use artillery, aircraft, and their rifles to suppress our positions, then advance when we fear, cannot return fire effectively. This tactical approach reflected American doctrine that emphasized firepower over maneuver. American commanders accepted that their troops were less experienced than German troops, less tactically sophisticated, less capable of complex maneuvers. So American doctrine minimized requirements for tactical sophistication and maximized application of firepower. Suppress enemy positions with overwhelming fire, advance under that suppression, close with grenades and automatic weapons, consolidate and repeat. The M1 Garand was essential to this approach. American squad leaders could order riflemen to suppress enemy positions, knowing their semi-automatic rifles could deliver enough fire to keep German soldiers pinned down. German squad leaders could not employ the same tactics because their bolt-action rifles lacked the necessary firepower. German squads needed machine guns to suppress positions, and machine guns required more soldiers to operate and were more vulnerable to American counterfire. Baum's regiment suffered steady attrition during October and November 1943. Not catastrophic losses from a single battle, but constant erosion from firefights, where American firepower advantages slowly ground down German resistance. Casualties were replaced, but replacements were increasingly young soldiers with minimal training, rushed to the front because the Eastern Front consumed experienced troops faster than training units could produce them. These young soldiers struggled with the Kar-98K under combat stress. Working a bolt-action rifle while under fire required muscle memory developed through extensive training. Inexperienced soldiers made mistakes, forgot to chamber rounds, failed to maintain proper shooting positions. The M1 Garand would have been more forgiving, the semi-automatic action reducing cognitive load during the chaos of combat. German soldiers captured in Italy during late 1943 were interrogated by American intelligence officers. Many mentioned the M1 Garand specifically when asked about American equipment. A captured Gefreiter named Klaus Hartmann told interrogators, "Your rifle is your greatest advantage. We hear it constantly, that quick rhythm of fire, 8 shots without stopping. By the time we work our bolts to fire 3 rounds, you have fired 8. The mathematics are simple. You win." The mathematics were indeed simple, but the implications extended beyond individual firefights. The M1 Garand's firepower advantage meant American units could accomplish tactical objectives with fewer casualties than German units in similar situations. Lower casualties meant American units maintained combat effectiveness longer. German units suffered higher casualties, degrading combat effectiveness faster, requiring more frequent relief and reconstitution. This dynamic created a strategic attrition spiral that Germany could not win. American industrial capacity replaced losses faster than combat consumed resources. German industrial capacity, increasingly degraded by Allied bombing, could not keep pace with losses. The gap widened monthly, then weekly, then daily, as Allied air superiority made German logistics increasingly impossible. By early 1944, German soldiers on all fronts understood they were fighting a losing war. The Kummersdorf report on the M1 Garand had documented one aspect of this broader failure. German weapons were adequate, sometimes superior in specific characteristics, but inferior in the aggregate when combined with industrial capacity and logistics that German could not match. The Gewehr 43 entered production in limited numbers during 1944. It was a good rifle, reliable enough for field use, accurate, capable of semi-automatic fire that matched the M1 Garand in most respects, but fewer than 500,000 were produced before the war ended. Most German infantry continued fighting with Kar-98K bolt-action rifles, accepting the firepower disadvantage because no alternative existed. Some German commanders tried to compensate by concentrating machine guns, issuing more submachine guns, emphasizing defensive tactics that maximized cover and concealment. These adaptations helped but could not eliminate the fundamental disparity. In mobile warfare, in meeting engagements, in situations where both sides encountered each other unexpectedly, American firepower advantages were decisive. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 demonstrated this pattern on a large scale. German forces achieved tactical surprise, penetrated American lines deeply, surrounded isolated American units. But even surrounded American units, cut off from resupply and reinforcement, delivered firepower that German attackers could not overcome without accepting catastrophic casualties. At Bastogne, American paratroopers held the town against German forces that outnumbered them significantly. The Americans lacked armor, artillery ammunition was rationed, medical supplies ran low, but they never lacked rifle ammunition, and their M1 Garands allowed them to deliver defensive fires that German forces could not suppress with available weapons. The siege lasted until American armored relief forces broke through, but the defense succeeded because American infantry firepower prevented German forces from overwhelming the position. German after-action reports from the Ardennes offensive repeatedly mentioned American rifle fire as a major obstacle to tactical success. German infantry advancing across open ground took devastating casualties from American riflemen who could fire continuously without the pause required to work bolt actions. German commanders who had faced Soviet infantry, armed mostly with bolt-action Mosin-Nagant rifles, found American infantry qualitatively different in defensive capability. As the war entered its final months in early 1945, the M1 Garand's advantages became even more pronounced. American forces advancing into Germany encountered Volkssturm units, militia composed of old men and young boys, given minimal training and inadequate weapons. Many Volkssturm units carried obsolete rifles, captured weapons, even hunting rifles pressed into military service. Facing these poorly equipped militia with bolt-action rifles, American infantry with M1 Garands possessed overwhelming advantages that made combat deeply one-sided. The professional Wehrmacht units still fighting were better equipped and trained, but they too suffered from the accumulated effects of years of attrition, inadequate replacements, and logistics collapse. The final Wehrmacht casualty reports, filed in the chaotic last weeks before Germany's surrender, documented losses that included thousands of infantry killed or wounded in small unit actions where American firepower proved decisive. No single engagement was strategically significant, but the aggregate effect was the destruction of German combat power through relentless tactical defeats, where better weapons, better logistics, and better industrial support ground down resistance that courage and tactical skill could not sustain. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, American forces occupied German territory with infantry units equipped entirely with M1 Garand rifles. German soldiers surrendering turned in Kar 98K rifles that were identical in basic design to the rifles German soldiers had carried in 1914. 30 years of military development, and German infantry still carried bolt-action rifles, while their opponents had moved to semi-automatic designs that provided decisive tactical advantages. The Kummersdorf evaluation in September 1943 had documented this disparity when the outcome was already determined but not yet inevitable. By documenting the M1 Garand's advantages, Oberst Paulus and Hauptmann Müller had revealed a truth that German military leadership could not address. Germany lacked the industrial capacity to compete with American weapons production. That fundamental weakness, more than any tactical error or strategic miscalculation, ensured Germany's defeat. The M1 Garand did not win the war for America. But examining it closely, understanding its advantages, recognizing the industrial capacity required to produce it in the millions, German officers held evidence of why they were losing, not because German soldiers were inferior, not because German tactics were wrong, but because German industry could not sustain modern warfare against opponents whose industrial capacity exceeded Germany's by orders of magnitude. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.